The girl was digging a ditch that ran the wrong way. Rosa Vanek, 11 years old, out on the West 40 with a mattock nearly as tall as she was. She wore a boy's overalls, cut down and rolled at the ankle, a straw hat, and a folded paper buttoned into her chest pocket. The ditch did not run downhill toward the creek the way any sensible drain would. It curved sideways across the slope, following no line anyone could see, holding dead level the whole way. By the end of the first week, she had cut 3 of them, long and shallow, and thrown the dirt into low ridges below each one. From the road, her father's good hayfield looked like something had clawed it. People slowed their trucks to stare. Rosa did not look up. She did not explain the ditches to her father or the neighbors who asked. She just kept swinging the mattock. Nobody could make sense of it. But the dry years were coming, and then they would. If stories of quiet patience, plain wisdom, and the old ways of working the land mean something to you, take a moment to subscribe. Leave a comment and tell us where in the country you are watching from. It helps these stories reach more folks. Now, back out to the West 40. The Vanek place lay in the rolling country of Saline County, Nebraska, where Czech families had broken the sod 3 generations back, and the wind never truly stopped. Rosa's people had farmed that ground since 1889. The land rose and fell in long, low swells of wheat and corn and pasture. Rosa lived with her father, Emil, a lean and careful man who used words the way he used cash, only when he had to. Her mother, Marta, kept a kitchen garden on hard alkali clay that most folks would have called hopeless, and somehow it fed them all summer. Her brother Frank, 16 and certain of everything, farmed alongside their father. Rosa was the quiet one. She noticed things. She had watched, 2 springs running, how the rain came down hard and brief, and then ran straight off the sloping fields into dry Willow Creek, brown and fast and gone, taking the best of the topsoil with it. Nobody else seemed to think much of it. She thought about it a great deal. The digging gave the whole county something to talk about. Cyril Dostal farmed the next section over. He stopped his truck at the fence one evening and leaned out at the sight of a child carving crooked trenches into good ground. "Rosa," he called, "what are you drawing pictures in your daddy's field for?" He was grinning. He meant no harm by it. He laughed the way people laugh at what they cannot figure, more puzzled than unkind. At church that Sunday, Wendell Blaha told it as a story, how the little Vanek girl had plowed a maze into the hay, and the men shook their heads. Even Frank was embarrassed by it. "You can't dig your way to rain," he told her at supper. "You're just making Dad extra work." Emil said nothing to that. He looked at his daughter across the table, then back at his plate. He did not tell her to stop. Marta passed the potatoes and said the ditches were Rosa's business and nobody else's. The idea had not come from nowhere. It had come from the barn. The winter before, up in the loft on a cold day, Rosa had found a stack of old farming bulletins in a trunk of her grandfather's things, yellow and mouse-chewed, printed by the government back in the dry 30s. One had a drawing that stopped her. It showed a hillside with level lines cut across it, and little arrows of rain soaking straight down between them instead of running off the bottom. Under the drawing it said that, on a slope, water and soil leave together, and that a farmer who wanted to keep both had to stop the water where it fell. She read it 4 or 5 times, and thought about dry Willow Creek running brown after every storm, carrying off the black dirt her grandfather had crossed an ocean to farm, and it made a plain kind of sense to her that it had never made to anyone else. She copied the drawing onto a page from her school tablet, folded it small, and buttoned it into her pocket. She did not tell her father what she had read. She only asked him, that spring, if she could have the West 40. He studied her a moment and said yes. Here is what the old bulletin knew. On a slope, when the rain comes hard, most of it never soaks in. It sheets down the hill, pours off into the creeks and away, and carries the loose topsoil with it. But a ditch cut dead level across the slope stops the running water cold, and it stands there with nowhere to be but down, soaking into the soil the whole length of the field. In a wet year, that hardly matters. But in a dry one, when a season's rain might come in 2 or 3 short storms, catching every drop and holding it in the ground, is the difference between a crop and dust. It was brutal work, and it did not go smoothly. The clay on the West 40 had baked hard as brick, and the mattock jarred her arms to the shoulder. She could cut only a few feet before her hands blistered and split, so she wrapped them in rags and kept on, dawn to dusk, all that first spring. Then, when a real rain finally came in June, it proved her wrong before it proved her right. She had cut 2 of the ditches with a slight fall to them instead of dead level, and the water ran along them and spilled out the low end, gouging a wash. Cyril Dostal saw it and called across the fence that her creek had sprung a leak. Rosa stood in the mud that evening, near tears, sure the whole notion was foolishness. But her father came out. He didn't ask what she was doing. He fetched a length of clear tubing and a jar of water and showed her, without a lecture, how to find true level. Then he took up a shovel and worked the low end with her until the water stood still and quiet, going nowhere but down. He never said a word about why. After that, it went better. By the end of the second spring, 9 long, curved ditches lay across the West 40, each dead level, backed by its low ridge of earth. When the summer rains came, she would walk out to find the ditches standing full and still, the water sinking in while the neighbors' fields had shed theirs to the creek. She said nothing about it. Nobody noticed. To the county, it was still just the strange thing the Vanek girl had done to a good field. 2 years went by. The rains held. And then, in the 3rd year, the rains quit. The dry came on slow, the way the worst droughts do. The spring rains that should have come did not. The wheat came up thin and pale. By June, the pastures had gone from green to straw, and the wind carried a fine grit that hazed the sun at noon. The old people began to talk about the dirty 30s, about 1934, when the topsoil had lifted off the fields and walked away on the wind. Emil watched the sky and said little. Wells that had never failed began to drop. Cyril Dostal's corn curled its leaves tight against the heat. Wendell Blaha's stood stunted and yellow in rows that ran straight up and down the slope. Day after day, the sky stayed a hard, empty white, 104 in the shade, and no cloud that meant anything. Rosa walked her ditches every evening, checking the level, waiting. Everyone in the county was waiting too, but most of them were only waiting to lose. The rain came at last in the middle of the 3rd dry summer, one enormous thunderstorm out of the southwest, and it fell on ground too hard to drink it. On every field in the county but one, the water did what water does on a slope. It sheeted off the baked earth and ran, gathering into brown ropes down every furrow, roaring into dry Willow Creek the color of coffee. Wendell Blaha stood on his porch and watched 2 inches of rain, the only rain in 40 days, run straight off his land and down the creek inside an hour. By evening, it was gone, every drop, and his field was as cracked as that morning. But on the West 40, the water met Rosa's ditches and stopped. It stood in all 9 of them, brimming and still, and it sank. It went down into the soil the whole length of the field and stayed there, out of reach of the sun. The creek took nothing from the Vanek slope that day. A week later, when the heat clamped back down and the rest of the county went on burning, one field in Saline County came up green. It was not perfect. The high corners still showed stress. But down the length of Rosa's ground, the corn stood dark and living, while every field around it died. It was the county agent who found it first. Gerald Timmons had spent the whole summer driving the back roads, riding up ruined fields, and he had stopped seeing green so entirely that he pulled onto the shoulder to be sure his eyes were right. When Rosa came down from the house, he asked her plainly who had laid out the contours. She said she had. He asked how she had known to do it. Rosa reached into her overall pocket and took out the folded page, worn soft now at the creases, and handed it to him. Gerald Timmons studied the child's copy of the old drawing a long moment. Then he asked if he might sit on the running board and copy it into his book, and he did, curve for curve. That fall, 3 neighbors ran level lines across their own slopes. Nobody announced it. Cyril Dostal did it quietly and never said another word about the leak. Rosa never once said she had told them so. There is a kind of seeing that has nothing to do with age. It belongs to whoever will look plainly at a thing and believe what it shows them, even when everyone older is looking the other way. You cannot make the sky give you more rain. You can only shape the ground, long before the dry years come, to hold on to what little the sky sends. Rosa Vanek understood that at 11, out of an old paper nobody else had bothered to read. The corn was good that fall. In a year the corn failed everywhere else. But the corn was never really the harvest. The harvest was the shape left in the land, the curved lines that held the water, keeping the soil at home. A crop is eaten by spring. A thing rightly understood feeds the ground for as long as anyone keeps the lines true. Rosa Vanek is grown now and farms the home place herself. The curved ditches still run level across the West 40, deeper in places where 60 years of rain have worn them, and in the dry summers her ground is still the last to brown. She keeps the old bulletin in a frame by the door. Children who visit ask about the crooked lines in the field, and she takes them out and shows them how the water learns to stay. Thank you for spending this time out on the Nebraska plains. If Rosa's story stayed with you, tell us in the comments about a time someone young saw clearly what all the grown folks had missed. Subscribe, and we will meet again at the next story.